Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, coming October 26th. Rated M for mature.
20 years ago, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas launched for the PlayStation 2. Since then, tens of millions of players have experienced CJ's return to Los Santos, his reunion with his family, and his attempts to rebuild his old street gang. But one thing that surprised me on a recent playthrough is that beneath the surface, San Andreas is much more mature than it lets on. It's not just a game about stealing cars and shooting rival gangs, it's a serious, nuanced, and often cynical exploration of identity and belonging, of power and corruption, and of several cities contrasting sociological and socioeconomic crises. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas is deeper than you remember.
It was time to go home. Grove Street. Home.
Welcome home, Carl.
A lot of the game's opening chapter is about home. Despite being away in Liberty City for 5 years, CJ still considers Los Santos and Grove Street his home. He wants to belong there with his family, and he seems to believe that he betrayed them or isn't worthy of their presence after Brian's death 5 years earlier. Home is where the heart is, and CJ's heart is, and always has been, with his family. A lot of this opening act, and ultimately the entire game, is about CJ trying to find his identity. Early on, this takes the form of CJ trying to prove to his brother Sweet that he belongs back in Grove Street. More than anyone, Sweet feels like he has been betrayed by CJ's absence.
That's another funeral you ran away from, fool.
He puts up his guard, expecting CJ to leave yet again.
Well, the last thing we need is your help.
And he doesn't trust CJ when he promises otherwise.
What, you think you back on the set?
I told you that, bruh.
Your word don't mean shit around here.
All CJ wants to do is feel like he belongs with his friends and his family, at home. So you'll spend several missions trying to prove to Sweet that you do belong, cleaning up the neighborhood, fighting against rival gangs, and rebuilding Grove Street families back to its former glory. And eventually, CJ achieves his goal, not just rebuilding the gang and driving out some of their rivals, but earning his brother's respect and approval.
CJ, you my brother, my running dog. I should have never doubted you.
It's nothing.
But you're home now, partner.
Yeah, that's right.
Home.
CJ has found his identity. He finally belongs at home. Unfortunately, it comes at a bad time. Within the same mission, CJ discovers Big Smoke and Ryder's betrayal, catches Sweet in the middle of an ambush, and is caught and essentially banished to the country while Sweet is sent to prison. Just as he rediscovered his home and rekindled his relationship with his family, it is all taken away from him, and he's forced to rediscover his identity once again. Interestingly, I think CJ does actually begin to find himself a bit outside of Los Santos, a new side of himself. After he wins the deed to a garage, he turns it into a fully functional chop shop with the help of his sister Kendall and her boyfriend Caesar. At Kendall's suggestion, he can start buying more assets with which to make money, like an RC shop operated by his associate Zero, a car dealership in San Fierro, and an abandoned airstrip in Bone County. CJ starts to see himself as a bit of a businessman, even if he does largely achieve success through illegitimate means. It's almost like the best of both worlds for him, using his criminal expertise to become rich and successful, and doing so alongside his family. This continues once he arrives in Las Venturas as well, most notably in his work for the Four Dragons Casino and his partnership with the rapper Mad Dog. To an extent, he's discovered his identity. When Sweet is finally released from prison though, thanks entirely to CJ's tireless and dangerous work, he's not interested in hearing about his brother's business ventures. In fact, he actively mocks and belittles them.
You never did get it, did you, Carl? I need to go check on things in the hood. Man, that's the problem. You always a perpetrator, running from what's real.
All Sweet cares about is getting back to Grove Street and ensuring the gang is up and running. It's all he's ever really cared about. He doesn't care about the money or success. He cares about his families, even if he does have to insult his biological one in the process. Interestingly, I think CJ's reactions also reinforce where his priorities lie. He defends himself in his actions and tries to convince Sweet to come back to the mansion, but ultimately relents. The rest of the game's missions are almost entirely Sweet's, and mostly focused on rebuilding the gang once again, even at the expense of CJ's other businesses. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't all about the money and the successes for CJ. It was about being around the people he loves and respects, his family, and ensuring their safety and security. So if rebuilding Grove Street families means ensuring Sweet's safety and security, CJ is going to do it. It's why at the end of the game CJ keeps his cool, because problems with the gang and the businesses are important, but ultimately they mean nothing to CJ compared to his family, and with Big Smoke and Tenpenny out of the picture, he can finally feel secure in their safety. His home is not the businesses or the mansion or even Grove Street. His home is wherever his family is. That's where his identity is. That's where he belongs.
Hey, Smoke, what made you flip out like that, man? Was it the drugs or what?
I got caught up in the money, the power.
There aren't really any characters in San Andreas who don't want more power to an extent, but what really sets them apart is the length to which they go to achieve it. Sweet explicitly refuses to introduce the gang to the heavy drug trade, as it violates too many of his morals, no matter how much money they could potentially earn in doing so. CJ knows that he could probably gain money, status, and power by working with Salvatore Leone and his mafia, but instead he chooses to stick with his people, those who have been there for him. Big Smoke and Ryder, meanwhile, go out of their way to betray their longtime friends in order to earn more money and power, and in the process, CJ and Sweet's mother is killed. Tenpenny and Pulaski don't hesitate to throw away their careers and reputation to achieve what they believe is success, no matter how short-lived it ultimately is. And sure, it is briefly rewarding for these people to follow this path, especially for Big Smoke and Tenpenny, who benefit the most from their increased money and power. But in the end, it catches up to them. Eventually, they get caught. Big Smoke and Ryder lose their closest friends, their family, and while they largely seem unfazed by it, the success doesn't last long anyway. Tenpenny and Pulaski's corruption is exposed by their newest recruit, and while they seem to think they've gotten away with it for a time, it isn't long until it catches up with them. One thing that sets Tenpenny's behaviours apart is that his corruption spits in the face of the very institution to which he belongs. Police are meant to protect their communities, not take advantage of their positions to tear them apart. Emphasis on meant to. This story wasn't written in a vacuum. It's based on real history of this happening, most notably the Rampart scandal of the late 1990s, in which dozens of police officers were found to have committed misconduct, including planting evidence, dealing narcotics, and police brutality. Tenpenny utilizes his power and balance to manipulate communities to do his bidding, or to behave in a manner that solely benefits himself, reflective of a very real power imbalance that exists between police and marginalized communities. Tenpenny embodies the broken systems that CJ is trapped in: manipulation, deceit, and violence, not unlike the same broken systems in which Los Angeles and several other cities were and are trapped, especially in the early 1990s. It's not like Tenpenny is particularly secretive about it either. He boasts about it and does it fairly publicly, at least in the neighborhoods in which those he manipulates reside, and this is in part how it eventually catches up with him. Similar could be said about Big Smoke and Ryder too. Their carelessness in hiding their association with rival gangs and police is how CJ ultimately discovers their betrayal. In each case, they let the power get to their heads, and it is this obsession with achieving said power that is their undoing. The consequences of Tenpenny's downfall, the city's riots, shows that this behavior, the imbalance of power and the manipulation of this imbalance to the benefit of one party, does not just impact the perpetrators or even just their victims. It has rippling consequences that can destabilize entire communities. Years of racial policing and violence, the beating of Rodney King, the killing of Latasha Harlins, and the subsequent acquittal of and slap on the wrist punishment for those responsible prompted riots in Los Angeles in 1992 that lasted 6 days. To a far less realistic and devastating extent, this happens in the game too. Tenpenny's corruption catches up with him. He is charged with several crimes and his behavior is made public. And while he is ultimately acquitted, he is forced to live the rest of his days on edge, prompting citywide riots. And the game doesn't just tell you about the riots, it shows you. For a period of time after Tenpenny's acquittal, the city of Los Santos is beset with rioting, and gameplay is subsequently impacted. GTA San Andreas doesn't just want to tell you about power and corruption, about its rippling consequences. It puts you right into the heart of the city whose story can perhaps show it best. Both Big Smoke and Tenpenny have some henchmen who try to protect them, but it's nothing against the incorruptible spirit of CJ's family. And in their dying moments, both of them make their true intentions already pretty clear, just a little bit clearer. Big Smoke and his spiraling obsession with success and notoriety.
When I'm gone, everyone gonna remember my name. Big Smoke.
And Tenpenny with a self-aggrandizing and overly romantic view of his own actions and importance.
50 of me, and this town would be okay. I took the trash out. I did.
They say that power corrupts, and nowhere is this clearer than in the antagonists of GTA San Andreas. Miami in the mid-1980s, the drug trade, organized crime, and pressure on immigration. the modern-day East Coast in the early 2000s, the mafia, political corruption, and pressure on aggressive policing. The most recent 2 Grand Theft Auto games, each the best-selling games of their years, had looked at 2 different decades in 2 different corners of the country. So for San Andreas, it seems a logical choice was to split the difference in decades and pick a different corner of the country, California and Nevada in the early 1990s. California, and especially Los Angeles, often felt like the center of the country around this time, at least as far as news and music was concerned. Artists like Metallica, NWA, Rage Against the Machine, and the Red Hot Chili Peppers were making their voices heard, and events like the Los Angeles riots, Rampart scandal, crack epidemic, and What's Truce brought a lot of attention towards the region. This is in part why Rockstar chose Los Angeles as the inspiration behind Los Santos when developing San Andreas. This decision is reflected in the portrayal of the cities too. It's not just an open world to explore, it's reflective of the real cities and the realities of the era. Los Santos, like Los Angeles, is rife with gang violence, police corruption, and a drug epidemic. You get a sense of this pretty much immediately in the game, as you're dropped off right in the heart of rival gang territory and forced to make your way back to your home turf. This is then followed by dozens of missions where you rebuild your gang by fighting against rivals, attempt to stop drug dealers from further ruining local communities, and do work for corrupt cops to avoid taking the blame for their crimes. It's not a coincidence that these missions take place in the game's opening Los Santos chapter. It's a direct reflection of the events and problems of Los Angeles around the 1990s. The city's social, political, and economic problems summarized, and truthfully somewhat satirized, in the opening of the blockbuster game of the year. After CJ is forced out of Los Santos, we have about a dozen missions set in the countryside, Flint County, Red County, and Whetstone, which thematically serve to represent CJ's isolation. He's separated from his family, his friends, and his home, just as these counties are largely separated from society and urban life. Socioculturally though, the area also represents the displacement and disparity of these communities. The economic inequality reflected in the focus on earning money through racing and robberies rather than building a home or reputation. The urban-rural divide, echoed in these missions that feel more isolated and incremental, not dynamic or powerful. And the imitation of flyover country, showing regions that are often overlooked, not just in real life, but also in conversations about this game specifically, that are, in reality, surprisingly beautiful and charismatic. The isolation and disparity of the country is a stark difference to the next location, San Fierro, based on San Francisco. Like its real-life counterpart, San Fierro represents industry, urban development, and gentrification. This is immediately reflected in the missions. Gone are the street gangs, races, and small-town robberies. Instead, CJ begins building and buying businesses, making new partners and acquaintances, and working with, and then against, a fairly significant crime syndicate. There's no longer a focus on clothing color or territories. It's more about acquiring businesses and looking out for family, however new its members may be. San Francisco is often seen as a bustling city of opportunity, home to several growing industries, from arts, science, and technology to real estate, insurance, and finance. San Fierro is the same, and represents as such to the player. Instead of the lower income of Los Santos or the quick high income that is to come, San Fierro represents a steady, often more legitimate form of income, a place where CJ can build his new identity at his own pace. On his way to the next major city, CJ completes some missions in the desert regions of Bone County and Tierra Robada. Desolate and isolated, like the countryside, but turned up to 11. This region is even more lawless, like the image of the real deserts that inspired it, full of government conspiracies and secrets, represented in the undercover agent Mike Torino and the game's version of the highly classified Air Force facility Area 51. It also allows CJ a little more time alone to find his identity amidst major life changes, before he heads towards the chaos that is Las Venturas. Like the city of Las Vegas that inspired it, Las Venturas represents glamour, success, and corruption, flashiness and opulence, but with little substance. This too is reflected in the missions. CJ has his small businesses. Now it's time for partnering with casinos, working with record producers and musicians, and dealing with the mafia. No longer are we robbing liquor stores and chasing down small-time drug dealers. Instead, we're planning complex heists on successful casinos, and flying to a different state to take down a target for a notable crime family. On this note, Las Venturas also represents corruption, but on a different level than Los Santos. It's not cops and gangs, it's mob families and government agents. The grandeur and prosperity are a mirage, meant to lure those dreaming of lucrative and successful lifestyles, who ultimately serve to fill the pockets of those who already have too much money for their own good. Capitalism. Like Las Vegas, it's flashy and expensive, appealing for many, but certainly not for everyone. CJ's return to Los Santos at the end of the game is important for a number of reasons. Thematically, it serves as a reflection of returning to one's home with the knowledge and wisdom granted by travel and growth. This isn't the first time CJ has returned home after an extended period, but he has changed more in his recent absence than the previous one. It also serves as CJ's final redemption, at least in his own eyes, and the reclaiming of his identity, allowing him to finally be seen as Sweet's equal, to make amends for his apparent responsibility for the death of his brother and his absence for the death of his mother, and to finally put to rest the traitorous Big Smoke and the corrupt and manipulative Tenpenny. I think to an extent this chapter also serves to reiterate the inescapable feeling of the cycle of violence. Despite spending time in prison, Sweet cannot quit the gang, nor the violence that comes with it. And so neither can CJ. Even after the riots, even after the Watts Truce, a peace agreement that saw a decrease in street violence, it didn't completely stop in Los Angeles either. Crime and violence continued, just as it does in Los Santos. And the missions reflect this too, as CJ and Sweet work, with violence, to regain their gang, their territory, and their reputation. But it's not just the missions, there's an entire gameplay mechanic built around this cycle of violence, with which the player is forced to engage to progress. To regain the gang's territory and reputation, CJ must enter enemy turf and kill a certain number of their members. Even after leaving the tense and violent Los Santos, after working his way through the isolation of the countryside and the desert, building businesses in the gentrified San Fierro, and earning money and reputation in the glamorous Las Venturas, CJ cannot escape the cycle of violence, all the way up until the credits roll. Despite this though, CJ feels at peace. Although the circumstances around it were difficult, his time away from Grove Street really allowed him to find himself, to discover his new identity, to feel isolated, inspired, and glamorous. So by the time he returns, he feels empowered, ready to face the power that has corrupted those he has known and caused him and his family so much strife. And once these problems are dealt with, he finally feels at home. He feels like he belongs. For the first time, when faced with things to do, with issues to solve, he doesn't feel the need to address them, not immediately. There's no mission for us to complete, nobody left to please. CJ has all the money and power he needs, all the social and cultural experiences he wants, and all the family and friends he ever asked for. Time for once to take it in, to take it easy, and smell the roses.
Carl, where are you off to now?
Finna hit the block, see what's happening. Now, I know you blind, man, but you gotta see this.